I did have the opportunity to preach here a few years back, and preached on Titus 3, 4 through 7. So I remember that time, and it was good. I'm glad to be back with you all today. I think I had, when I heard that I would be preaching, I did bring two messages and kind of labored between the two. I think what I want to do is I just want to remind you in this message, and let the Lord apply it however He so chooses to apply it, but I just want to remind you of how powerful the gospel is. I say that because in the sense of a small church, in a church plant, or in an area such as the one that you have, sometimes you could grow weary, you could become discouraged, you could become to the point you think, can we make this work? Can we effectively do a work here? Could God do anything in this place? And so, personally, I need to be reminded that the gospel, as we heard this weekend, the glorious gospel, it still raises dead people to life. It's still very powerful. The gospel still has the power to convert drug addicts, to convert homeless. The gospel is powerful enough to convert rich people, prideful and arrogant people, and all types of people, whatever the race or class that they may be. If I can do anything today, I just want to remind you not to give up on the gospel. That this is the tool, this is the thing we have been given as the gospel. And so, one-on-one, day by day, amongst each other, as we meet for church, let us remind ourselves of the gospel. Let us think about ourselves. By the way, if you have been a receiver of the gospel, you were dead. You hated God. You loved yourself. You went your own way. And God apprehended you. And here you are. You're in church, sitting under the preaching of the Word of God, because the God of heaven apprehended you. Well, God can apprehend somebody else. God can apprehend as many as He would like to apprehend. But even if He apprehends no one and brings them to this church, and you never grow in numbers by one person, still a blessing to have a place to meet, have a place to pray, have a place for your kids to grow up, have a place for people to be baptized, have a place for you to be fed spiritually, be encouraged by the Word of God. He's given you a pastor, put some people here in order that you can grow and worship the living God. Just think about it right now today. There's over 6 billion people on planet Earth. And I would say 97% of them are not in church. That's made that number up. But a lot of them are not in church. They're playing golf, they're fishing, they're shopping and all that. But you're here. God's been kind and good to you, given you a place and given you a desire for Him. So to think that the God of heaven has apprehended you and brought you into His family, it's just a demonstration of His grace and mercy. He could have let you go on. You could be playing golf today. I don't know why I'm talking about golf. I don't even play golf. But you could be doing something else today. But you're here. God's been gracious and kind to you. So I don't know what the title of this message is. I'm going to title it, The Gospel According to Manasseh. The Gospel According to Manasseh. You'll find Manasseh in 2 Kings and chapter 21. He's the most wicked king that reigned in the Old Testament. I don't like Manasseh at all in this passage, and hopefully as we go through this and get a description of him, my only objective is for you to use your mind to think about what the text is saying and to accurately comprehend the person Manasseh. I want you, if you can, to imagine that Manasseh is your next door neighbor. Manasseh is your boss. Manasseh is the person that you buy chicken nuggets from at the fast food joint. Manasseh's the person that you rub shoulders with in wherever your life takes you. So don't put Manasseh 2,600 years in the past. As you hear who he is, imagine that you know him, that he's in your vicinity and you have something to do with him. Maybe he's your brother. Maybe he's in your own family. Maybe he's just someone you work with. Maybe he plays tennis with you, whatever. But imagine him to be the person next door. So we find him in 2 Kings chapter 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign. We did this last night, me and Lydia did, and it was fun because she's 12 years old. And so Manasseh was 12 years old, but he became the king. And disastrously, he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, how did he do this? Well, he did this in accordance to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. Now, here's what he did. He rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah, as a good king, that Hezekiah, his father, had destroyed. And he erected altars for Baal and made an Asherah, as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. Not only that, he worshipped all the host of heaven. In other words, he instituted or brought in star worship, served them. He bowed down to the physical astronomy, the stars of heaven. Verse 4, he's progressively getting worse here. Verse 4, he built altars in the house of the Lord. Pausing in the text. You're getting a sense of this guy. Whatever will make the people happy, I'll do it. If you are not happy with one God, not happy with one form of worship, then I'll build multiple altars in the house of God, and that way it'll become accessible for everybody. So the house that is to be called the name of the Lord has now literally become a den of idolatry under his leadership. I'll set up stations around the room, if you will, and you can bow to various gods when you show up here at the house in Jerusalem. So he builds these altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, "In Jerusalem I will put my name." Just briefly saying to you, this house was supposed to be solely dedicated to the glory of God. And this guy, Manasseh, is building altars to other pagan deities within the house that is dedicated to the glory of God. So verse 5, he also built altars for all the host of heaven and in the two courts of the house of the Lord. Verse 6, it gets worse. Abortion has been around for a long time, and child sacrifice is nothing new. He burned his sons, sacrificed them, killed them as an offering. He literally executed his own children as an offering to a foreign deity. And he used fortune telling and omens, and he dealt with mediums and with wizards. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him, the Lord, to anger. And the carved image of the Asherah that he had made, he set it, and it gives the sense here that it's set in the center, a prominent place in the house. What house? This house of the Lord, which the Lord had said to David and to Solomon his son. In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I'm going to put my name forever. And I will not cause the feet of Israel to wander anymore out of the land that I gave their fathers, if only they will be careful to do according to all that I have commanded them, according to the law that my servant Moses commanded them. And here's the danger of having a wicked leader. The people are influenced and they're deceived. So the people hear and understand that God had said these things about his house, but they did not listen. And Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done, whom the Lord destroyed before the people of Israel. Let's continue on. Verse 10. The Lord, because Manasseh is like this, because this is who he is, because he is this evil, the Lord said by the servant the prophets, so God spoke to the prophets and the prophets proclaimed, because Manasseh king of Judah, has committed these abominations, because he's done more evil than all the Amorites did who were before him, and he has made Judah also to sin with his idols. Therefore, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am bringing upon Jerusalem and Judah such disaster that the ears of everyone who hears of it will tingle. This is an Old Testament phrase. It's the meaning that there's a judgment that is coming unlike you've ever seen or heard of before. This is the most devastating judgment that you could possibly imagine. Perhaps you can't even imagine the fullness of this judgment. But God says, this is what I'm going to do, because Manasseh is this wicked, and he's led all of the people to be as wicked as he is. And so this is going to be my response to these wicked people. Therefore, thus says the Lord, I'm going to bring this and their disaster, and their ears will tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the measuring line of Samaria, the plumb line of the house of Ahab. So I'm going to take, and God's saying, I'm going to wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. You've had meals, fellowship meals at churches, what have you. You take your plate and you're in a restaurant thing and you scrape it all off into the trash can. Maybe you take it and hit it and knock all of the elements off of it. You're just going to take everything off of it. This is what he's saying here. Because of Manasseh and what he's done, I'm going to wipe this place clean. Like unto Samaria. I'm just going to wipe it out, and we're just going to regroup and start over. Almost gives me the sense of the judgment of Noah and drowning out in the flood. I'm going to wipe this thing out, and we're going to start with a new group. So, verse 14, I will forsake. It's always bad news when God forsakes, turns people over. I will forsake the remnant of my heritage. I will give them into the hand of their enemies, and they will become a prey. They will become spoil to all their enemies, because they have done what is evil in my sight. They have provoked me to anger since the day their fathers came out of Egypt, even unto this day. Verse 16, moreover, Manasseh, he shed very much innocent blood, till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to another, besides the sin that he made Judah to sin, so that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, the rest of his acts are in Chronicles, and he was buried in the garden of the house, in the garden of Uzzah, and Amon, his son, reigned in his place. Amon only made it 2 years before he died. All right, so let's just make a couple of thoughts about Manasseh. Now, and again, you're imagining, you know this guy. This is a heck of a neighbor to have beside you. This would be a tough boss to work for, would it not? Be a tough person to have at your family reunion. Not sure how your conversation may go with such an individual. But this is Manasseh according to this description. Just again, bringing out the highlights. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He was walking in accordance with the pagan nations. And remember, the pagan nations that God would drive out, and drive out because of their idolatry and because of their rebellion, Manasseh takes what was driven out and brings it back and even magnifies it. Matthew Henry said something like this: when the holy seed, being of the seed of the nation of Israel, when the holy seed degenerates, they are commonly worse than the rest of the profane. It's maybe kind of like this. Someone that's raised in church but doesn't really get converted. They're not really born again, but they're in church. And then they leave out of the church and reject everything they were around growing up. Many times they become worse than pagans who never went to church. It's kind of the sense of Manasseh here. He became worse than those who were before him. Rebuilding the high places is a direct result of seeking, as I've already said, to provide the people what they wanted. It's a dangerous route whenever you begin to lead, trying to figure out how to give people what they want. Just a reminder to Nathan, to your church, and just a reminder to you. Church is not a place that is built to fancy to all the people's desires. Church is a place in which God is to be gloriously exhibited before the people through the preaching of the Word and living out the principles of a godly character. We meet together not to satisfy the desires of the people. We meet together to exalt the greatness of God that we can worship Him. So our desires get put to the side, and God is to be the centerpiece of what church is to be about. Manasseh knew nothing of that. He erected the altars for the Baal. And you may or may not know this, but Baal is not necessarily the name of one particular deity or one particular god. It's just the presiding deity of an area, wherever that area may be. And so this Baal may take many different forms depending on the area of which it is worshipped. And so it's not only applied to the local gods of an area, it also can be used as a distinct god as well. This has been a common problem in the nation of Israel, and Manasseh is bringing it back. It had taken a big blow. Baal worship had taken a big blow back in 2 Kings chapter 11 and verse 18, and in which it had taken out these Baal worship, but now it's making its comeback. It reminds me much, I don't know if you've been to Mexico, but it reminds me much of Mexico. I was just there just a few weeks ago. But the number of idolatrous places that you can worship are beyond counting, well, especially in Mexico City. But there's shrines and idols literally by the thousands everywhere. You got the Virgin de Guadalupe, you've got all of these saints that are erected on the side of the road, on squares, in the marketplace. They're everywhere. And they have the big shrine built. They have candles, and they have all the paraphernalia that goes with it. And they have an altar you bow at. They have places you can put the money in. You put the money in the box, and little do they know the priest collects all of that and gathers that later. But they have this. You can worship anywhere in Mexico City. You can walk maybe 100 yards at the max and find something to bow down before to worship. It would save you a trip to some church somewhere else. You can just bow anywhere and honor whatever God it is that you want to somehow honor. This is what Manasseh's doing. So in our day it still happens, but it was certainly being provided by Manasseh. He made an Asherah in verse 3. This goddess, this Asherah, is a female goddess taken over from the Phoenicians and the Syrians, and then taken over by the Israelites when they fell into idolatry. Her worship was lewd, and it was associated with the Baal worship as well. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. Ahab had done that. Manasseh is doing that. Verse 3 again. He worships all the host of heaven. This is a direct and clear implication of star worship. You may not be into star worship, and you may say, that's stupid. Who in the world would worship stars? Look, people that read horoscopes, people look to the skies for direction. If you don't think that's true, the eclipse is coming here. Have you heard about it? People are going crazy over the eclipse. My son-in-law, my daughter live in Wyoming. You can't get a place to stay on the time of the eclipse within 100 miles of them. My daughter's actually thinking of renting their house out and sleeping in the church because people would pay upwards of $1,000-something to have a place to stay just so they can be in the right location to see the eclipse. I'm praying it's cloudy and nobody can see nothing. But I'm telling you, people are moved by things like this, and Manasseh is moved by things like this, and so he becomes into this star worship. And if you think it's just some foreign thing that sprang up, Moses actually wrote about it. Moses warned them about it. Manasseh would know this. In Deuteronomy 4:19, Moses said, beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven. You see the sun, the moon, the stars, and the host of heaven, and you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Look, the Lord has not allotted these to be worshipped. You don't worship the created, you worship the Creator. Deuteronomy 17 also says the same thing. You don't worship sun, moon, host of heaven. He says, I have forbidden you to worship them. But Manasseh says, you know what? I don't care what God says. I don't care what His Word says. This is what the people want, and I kind of like it. Let's do it. And so he brings it forward. He builds altars in the house of God. Faithful worshipers of God come to the place He had appointed for the performance of their duty to God, and they find to their grief and terror other gods ready to receive their offerings. Now, it may not have the same impact, and I understand, but just for description's sake, one of the big movements in Mexico is the Santa Muerte. It's the saint of death. And so it's kind of like the dark side of religion. 2 Catholic priests are kicked out of the Catholic Church. They're kind of a little bit ticked about that, so they develop their own religion, and it's the Santa Muerte. There are Santa Muerte statues and idols all over. I've been to the original shrine, which, by the way, is not a safe place to preach. I preached there, and they called some bouncers in, and they physically removed me from the place because I was hurting their business a little bit by preaching Christ in front of the Santa Muerte. This thing began to grow. They boast of over 2 million followers, and went this last time to this place, and I'm telling you, I can show you the pictures of it. There's a Santa Muerte that is 40 foot tall. 40 foot, I mean, huge. 40 feet tall. She has the skull, it's a skull face. She's just a skeleton woman. They actually call her La Flaca, the skinny girl. And she's the saint of death. And so if you want a curse put on somebody, you can give an offering. And so I went to this place, and what's sickly about it is, where this 40-foot tall statue is, they have church pews around her, and in front of her, they have an altar in which you can bow and pray. And right now, today, in Mexico City, they're having church service from 10 to 2, and they have it there at the foot of the Santa Muerte. And in front of it, they have a store. It's about as big as this room, and it is filled with the Santa Muerte idols that you can buy to take home to put in your own house. Okay, so this is something that's going on in Mexico, and it's spreading around the world. But it's all of these idols. I'm telling you this why? Because this is what's happening here. Imagine this morning that you come here to Sojourn Church to worship. You come to hear the music and to sing. You come to hear the word preached, and you want to pray and spend time with God. And you come, and here on the communion table, instead of bread and juice, you have a Santa Muerte. And below the Santa Muerte, what? You have whiskey, you have beer, you have Coke and cigarettes, and you have pitchers, and all these things that people put out as an offering to request for the Santa Muerte to help them. This is what Manasseh is doing in the house of the living God of Jerusalem, where God has said, this is the place my name shall dwell forever. And He's erected the Asherah in the center of the worship center. The people come in, they're like, what's that? And He's providing this, profaning the very name of God. This is, to me, one of the greatest of the descriptions of sin that He commits is very much this issue. But for our emotionalism, this may sound more severe, is that He is sacrificing His own children. And just a shout out or a note to remind you of our country, abortion is an issue. Abortion is a major issue in this country. You can murder your baby legally almost any day of the week. We've been doing abortion ministry for a long time. John Speed up in Syracuse, New York, has promoted and done a great work in abortion ministry. Our church does abortion ministry. But I just want to remind you, it's a real issue. Every day, young ladies are aborting babies. Fathers are taking girls as young as my daughter to the abortion clinic to rid them of problems. We live in a country that promotes and pushes the sacrifice of children to the God of self. This is going on all the time. People sanction this, support this, and actually are aggravated when people preach against it. So this is not so foreign that Manasseh is sacrificing his children and say, man, they were wicked back then. We're wicked today. People have this type of position in their life today. And then it also says he was committed to fortune-telling, omens, mediums, wizards, and sorcery. Just to give you the definitions, it may or may not help. Fortune-telling, just looking for some way for you to be known about the future. Be able to predict the future, tell you the future. As my good friend Justin Peters says, he says, why do you not see the health, wealth, and prosperity movement guys working at the hospital? The same reason you don't see the psychics winning the lotto. It don't work. They can't predict the numbers. They can't predict the future. But Manasseh's into fortune telling. He's into omens. An omen is something that is believed to be a sign or a warning of something that will happen in the future. Something as quacky as Pastor Hagee writing about 4 blood moons, and this is what's going to happen because the moon is this. He couldn't even see the moon in Jerusalem, but he's writing books and selling them. Oh, the sky looks like this, so it means this. Manasseh is very much into the omens. Mediums, an individual held to be a channel of communication between the earthly world and the world of spirits. You remember, do you not? You remember King Saul in the Old Testament? And he wanted to have this conversation, with Samuel and call him up from the dead. You remember that story? You got all these commentators say all this stuff about it. Look, I can tell you this. He had no conversation with Samuel. You say, why not? As the Puritans would say, because his body is in the grave and his soul's in heaven. He ain't called up nobody. I can tell you exactly where the prophet was. He's in heaven. His body's in the grave. All he saw was a demonic representation clothed in a prophet's uniform. Anyways, you can think about that later. Wizards having to do with magic, sorcery, the power to gain assistance or control over evil spirits, especially for divining. Now, Moses spoke of this, did he not? Moses said, "You shall not eat any flesh with blood in it, and you shall not interpret omens, and you shall not tell fortunes." Moses also said, "Do not turn to mediums. Do not turn to necromancers. Do not seek them out. Don't make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God." Don't do any of that. Don't read the horoscope in the paper. Don't see how the cards work out. Don't go by the little teos down here. Look at the cards and try to predict your future. You have a God. You have a God in heaven who's alive. You want to know about your life? Pray and seek His face. Read His Word. Don't go to those other things. They are forbidden and they will do you great harm. A charmer or a medium or a necromancer or one who inquires of the dead, Moses said, shall not be found among you. Run them out. We're not going to have any of that. Moses says, run them out. Manasseh says, bring them in. Kind of like them. He sets the Asherah in the house of God, as we have mentioned. Now, verse 9, he led the whole nation astray. This is the great danger of a wicked ruler, because as wicked as Manasseh is, sin is never able to be contained in the individual. Note to yourself, and just a note of truth. Your sin, I'm going to move and make it personal, your sin has effect. Even in this body, if you sin, your sin affects the people within this body. It affects the people around you. It affects your family. You can't contain sin. That's one of the reasons it's so despicable, because it has such effects upon those who are around. For Manasseh, it affects the entire nation because he's on top as the leading king. Those who live wicked lives, make no mistake about it, will have to answer to God. But how much worse will it be when they have to answer for all of those that they have led astray? I think Jesus said something about that. It'd be better for a millstone to be tied around their neck and be thrown in the deepest sea than to lead these children astray. So Manasseh is bringing a record that is very, very weighty to Judgment Day. He refused to listen to God. I'm not listening. I don't care what the prophets say. I have no interest in anything you have to put before me. He sheds innocent blood. He fills Jerusalem with sin. And, now whether true or not, I don't know, and neither do you, but many Jews believed that he is the very king who is the one who gave the order for the prophet Isaiah, who would be a contemporary, to be sawn in half, that you find in Hebrews 11. He was sawn in half, but you think that it would be under the direction of Manasseh. If that be true, then he also has on his record the execution of one of the great prophets of the Old Testament. This man is a very wicked man. So in 10 through 18, and in a little bit of a shorter fashion, but here comes the judgment of God. Habakkuk is one of the prophets at this time. He's a contemporary, Habakkuk 1:5. He predicted the Chaldean judgment as a fact which excited and astonished and appeared incredible. Here comes this great judgment. We see in our text today in verse 12, I will bring disaster. You hear of it, your ears will tingle. Such a judgment has never been heard of before. It excites alarm and terror. People do not know how to take in this level of judgment that is coming. Verse 13, I'm going to stretch out this measuring line, this plumb line. This is my standard. This is what is holy. This is what is right. This is what is good. This is what is honorable. Everything to the side of that, I am going to destroy. This is the judgment that God is bringing. It's a figurative expression in Isaiah 34:11. It's a measure of desolation and plummet of devastation. I'm going to destroy Jerusalem as I have destroyed Samaria. I'm going to exterminate its inhabitants like the house of Ahab. I'm going to take and I am going to issue a judgment that you will not be able to comprehend. Verse 13 again, I will wipe Jerusalem clean. And all of those things sound devastating to me. But the thing, maybe because I'm a believer, the thing that bothers me the most or upsets me the most is this phrase. I will forsake them. It reminds me of what? Romans 1. God gave them up. God gave them up. God gave them up. He says, this is the type of speech that ought to make us tremble. To think that God could forsake or to give one up. Look, if you have any decency of love within your heart and you're concerned about a lost soul, you're concerned because you know they're pagan, you know if they die they're going to go to hell, these types of things bother you. What if God writes your neighbor off? What if God says, I'm done. I've given them offer after offer after offer, and I'm not giving them another. The time would run out, and God would never issue them an opportunity of grace again. He'd never give them a gospel again. To think that, I want you to feel the weight of this for your evangelism, for your urgency in this church, in this community. What's going to happen if God says, we're done? Get a sense of urgency. People who die without Christ go to hell. They really do. The Bible's really true. People really face the judgment of God. And when they die without Christ, that's it. I was just in a restaurant last week, and a dear friend of mine by the name of Gente. And I loved him. He's a good friend. And I ministered to him for many, many years. And tragically, not long ago, he was murdered. And I was out of town. I was not able to attend the funeral. And to be quite honest with you, the restaurant that he owned, that I frequented and always had a good relationship with him, I just couldn't go back. I never went back. I didn't want to go back. He's dead. I have nothing to say. He died and he went to hell. What am I going to say? So I just forget it. I'm not going back. But this last week, I was invited to go with some people, and I felt obligated to go, and so I go. I walk in the restaurant, and as I'm walking to my table, his wife walks in the room. She just starts crying right in the middle of the restaurant. What do you say? You can't say it's okay. Well, he's in a better place. He's not in a better place. So you stand in the middle of a restaurant with people looking at you like you're stupid, and you just cry. You just hug and cry. Then you go sit in the bar with his wife and try to explain to her the gospel, and you just leave sad because this happens. When somebody dies without Christ, there's no comfort to give. There's nothing you can relate to them. You can't even go to the funeral and encourage them in any way. I want you to feel that because that's the world we live in. That's why we're here. God saved us, and we're the instrument to give the gospel to someone else. Here, Manasseh, you've seen his track record. You've seen his description. You may or may not know his whole story. We've seen what's laid out in this text. If we stop the story at this point, we see here in verse 17 that he's buried. He dies. What's the final fate of such a wicked man? Now, I'm not asking you to answer out loud. It's not necessary. But in your mind, if you're tracking the story, what is the final fate of such a wicked man? What happens to a man such as this? What's God's final word over such a wicked man? What does it say on his epitaph? Here lies a Manasseh, a great Sunday school teacher. Here lies a Manasseh, a great man of God. Here lies a Manasseh, a great king of Israel. Here lies a Manasseh. Burn in hell, buddy. What do you put on the epitaph of a man who lives like this? Here lies Manasseh. Tell the devil I said hi. What do you write? I'll give you a moment to formulate your thought. What are you going to write on the tombstone of this man when he's buried in the garden? Now, you're taking your Bibles and you turn to Chronicles, chapter 33, 2nd Chronicles, chapter 33. In verses 1 through 9, you get basically the same description that we just read. And then in verse 10, we get close to the end of Manasseh's life. Is everybody okay? I don't know how long I've preached now. You're good? We're good? Okay? All right? So now we get close to the end of Manasseh's life. And this is what I'm wanting to show you, just to remind you. Maybe you already know all this stuff. I just want to encourage you in it. But look in verse 10. The Lord spoke to Manasseh, to his people. They didn't pay no attention. Therefore the Lord, here's what He did. He brought upon them the commanders of the army of the king of Assyria. Look what they did. They captured Manasseh with hooks. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I don't think it's pleasant. They captured him with hooks. They bound him with chains of bronze and brought him to Babylon. At least get the picture in your mind. The king and the most powerful leader of a nation is captured by hooks, bound by chains, taken to Babylon to a crusty, dead, cold, ugly-looking prison. He's having a bad hair day. Okay? This is not good. But notice in verse 12. Now, you can understand, can you not? Even if you're this wicked, you can understand this is bad. So here he is in verse 12. He's in distress. You think, bring the word distress out. Okay, let's think about it this way. If you can use your imagination, put yourself in these shoes. You've lived bad, you've lived corrupted, you've done all these things, and you get caught, you get apprehended, they take you to jail, and they say, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we're going to take you to the center of town. We have a device built there. We have a rope hanging from it. We're going to put the rope around your neck. The floor's going to fall out, and you're going to hang before the city, and you're going to die. At 2 o'clock tomorrow. And you're in your cell. Now you understand distress. How much more time? How much more time? In the morning, you hear people walking towards you. Distress. Are they really going to get me? They come into the cell. They grab you by the arm. Where are they leading you? They're leading you to the device to execute you. Your heart is trembling. Your brow is sweaty. You're wringing your hands. I'm about to be executed. My conscience is screaming. I am wicked. I am sinful. I'm going to hell. God's going to judge me. This is not good. Is there any way out? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. It's just almost like to the point of a heart attack because I'm about to be executed. This is Manasseh, and he's in distress. So the text says, he entreated the favor of the Lord his God. He humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. Now, look, I know that there's a teaching and people do this thing called the sinner's prayer. And you may be familiar with that, but basically it's something along these lines. We have a service, you have an emotional plea, you ask people to come forward in a church service, and they say they want to get saved, and you say, okay, just repeat this prayer after me. Dear God, I've sinned. Dear God, I have messed up. I've heard about Jesus and I believe Jesus. Please have forgiveness on me, and I ask Jesus in my heart. Something along these lines, and you repeat this prayer, and after this transaction is done, then supposedly you're a Christian, and then 4 hours later they baptize you. Something like that. And so you have a lot of these false conversions that have gone on. Now, I understand that that type of prayer is not biblical. But herein lies a sinner's prayer that I'm for. Herein is a real sinner's prayer. Here's a man in distress, overwhelmed with his depravity. He's possibly prostrate on the floor. He's wringing in sweat. He's entreating the favor of God. Oh God, Oh God, is there any mercy left for me? Is there any way that you, in all of your holiness and all of your purity and all of your goodness and all of your mercy, is there any way that you have the power to come and do something in my cold, wicked, dead heart? I've hated you. I've rebelled against you. I've fought against you. I've tried to remove your name from all the country. I've profaned your sanctuary. But is there any mercy? Oh God, I'm not going to quit praying until they execute me or until mercy comes running. What else can he do? It's like Pilgrim's Progress. Dear Brother Hopeful, how did you get saved? Well, I prayed. Well, did you get saved? No, I didn't get saved. He said, what'd you do? He said, I prayed again. He said, what'd you do then? I prayed again. He said, I must have prayed 100 times over. Did it work? He said, no. He said, what'd you do? He said, I just kept praying. He said, what else could I do but die at the throne of grace? You hear what I'm saying? He cried out until grace came. Cried out until mercy arrived. This is what Manasseh did. He entreated the favor of the Lord his God. He humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. Verse 13. He prayed to him. Now you can strain your Calvinism through this verse. God was moved. You gotta love it. A sovereign God moved by a wicked king. Friends, I'm trying to tell you there's hope for your neighbor. I'm trying to tell you there's hope for this community. I'm trying to tell you that if the gospel is made known, that there's people even here in this hood that can begin to entreat the favor of God and can cry out for mercy, and that God would be moved. It says it here in the text. God was moved by his entreaty. Notice, can you imagine the distance of that cell that he's bound in to the glorious throne room of God, and yet God heard his plea? Can you see that? Could you see that in this neighborhood? Right now somebody's dealing with a divorce. Right now some kid's being physically abused. Right now some mother's contemplating aborting her baby. Right now things are falling apart. Somebody's lost their job. They're in a financial strait. And somewhere in this neighborhood someone could be made known of the gospel, and they could pray, and the God of heaven could hear their plea. He delivers him out of Babylon. He brings him to Jerusalem, into his kingdom. Notice the last line of verse 13. Manasseh knew. Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. Humbled himself. He prayed. Entreaty, prayer. And he knew the Lord was God. Let me give you just a couple of things on this word know, or knew, that you may not know. This word for him to know the Lord is the same word that gets translated for sexual intimacy or sexual intercourse. It is a very intimate term. Abraham knew Sarah. This is the same word. Manasseh came into a unique, intimate reunion relationship with the God of heaven. It became a very personal relationship. Look, if you're tracking, this is not complicated. Think with me just for a moment. The wickedness of the description of Manasseh, the hardness, the rebellion, the idolatry, and all of those things. Think about all of that. An entreaty, a prayer, a pleading, a begging, a God who is moved, a God who comes, and a knowing that is personal and real, that now this Manasseh that's been described this way is walking in union with the living God of heaven. This is biblical repentance. This is biblical faith. Repentance, change of mind, change of heart, a turning away from all wickedness, and a receiving of Christ by faith. He knew the Lord. I just want you to understand, this gospel is the same gospel we're working with. Look, I have my own list. Maybe you have your list. Well, I don't know if God could ever save them. I know God can. Now, whether He will or not is a different question. But I want to encourage you, don't ever digress to the point of saying, I don't think God can save whomever your list is. God can save Manasseh. If God can save you, God can save anybody. And God can save them whenever He jolly well pleases. It's our responsibility to keep interceding, keep sharing, keep demonstrating Christ's likeness to those around us in order they can see what a Christian is. And then in the good providence of God, a time would come that by the Spirit of God He would prick their hearts and they would see their wickedness and understand their need for a Savior, and they would make entreaty and they would make prayer, and the God of heaven would be moved, and lo and behold, their life would be radically, thoroughly, and supernaturally changed. They don't need a doctor. They don't need a remedy. They don't need 3 steps to a better way to live. They need a supernatural, miracle-induced gospel that raises dead people to life. That's what we're supposed to believe as a church. As Christians, that's what we believe. We say we believe that. I'm asking you, do you believe that? Now, lastly, 14 through 17. Let me read the text and then just a couple of comments. Afterwards, verse 14, this is 2 Chronicles 33:14. After what? After he entreated, after he prayed, after he sought God, after he come to the point of knowing the Lord is God. After that, now, watch, you see that there, right? This is genuine conversion. Remember, all this wicked stuff he's done, all the things that he's put in place. Now, he builds an outer wall for the city of David west of Gihon in the valley for the entrance into the fish gate, and carried it around Ophel and raised it to a very great height. Step number 1. Did you see it? I'm going to build a wall. What is a wall for? Defense, protection, safety. Before, I tore down all defense and profaned everything. Now I'm going to build a wall to protect it because this is holy. He also put commanders of the army in the fortified cities of Judah. And he took, notice, here's an action. He took away the foreign gods and the idol from the house of the Lord. Can you see him walking in the church building? Remember I described her as the Santa Muerte? And he grabs her by the throat. He takes her out and throws her in the dumpster in the back. By the way, I did something like that in a revival, and they never asked me to come back. But they had some idolatry in the church, and I took it out and threw it in the dumpster. It makes people mad, is my point. And they were furious. But I couldn't stand it. It was idolatrous. I just threw it in the dumpster. Somebody said, where did it go? I said, it went where it belonged. I was done. I only tell you that to say, this is what he did. All these people have fallen in love with their idol in the church. But now he's been converted. We can't go into church with all these idols anymore. So he goes back into church, and the idols that he put in there, he takes and throws them out. Not having that no more. Some people are mad. But you see, when you're really converted, let the persecution come. But we're not going to have idolatry because I know who the Lord is. He's God. And all these other things are trying to rob him of his glory. We're done with them. He took them all away. Took the foreign gods. Took the idol from the house of the Lord. All the altars he had built on the mountain in the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. He threw them outside the city. I just made it to the dumpster. He took them all the way out of town. He also restored the altar of the Lord, offered sacrifices, peace offerings, and thanksgivings, and he commanded Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. Nevertheless, it's a lot easier to lead people into wickedness than it is to lead people into righteousness. It doesn't take long to corrupt a people. But if you try to bring a nation to righteousness, blood, sweat, and tears. Make that personal in the church as well. Take a church and make it all about the people. Have you a bunch of lights and smoke and music and a bunch of parties and give out a bunch of free donuts and coffee. You can build a group and they'll gravitate to all of the things that you can provide them. But try to build a true church. It takes more than a year. It takes more than 5. I've been pastoring for 17 years and I still don't think I'm going to get there. It takes the rest of your life being poured out in order to build something that is worthwhile to the name of the living God. And so these people, they still sacrifice to the high places. Nevertheless, the people still sacrifice at the high places, but only to the Lord their God. They still had this mixture a little bit going on. Verse 18, concluding Manasseh. The rest of the acts of Manasseh, his prayer to his God, the words of the seers who spoke to him in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, there in the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. And his prayer, how God was moved by his entreaty, and all his sin and his faithlessness, and the sites on which he built high places, and set up the Asherim and the images, before he humbled himself. Behold, they are written in the Chronicles of the seers. So Manasseh, now we're back to the epitaph, slept with his fathers, and they buried him in his house, and Amon his son reigned in his place. So the last thing that is actually recorded about Manasseh is that he strengthens the holy city. He sought to destroy the pagan religion, taking away the gods, taking the idol out, tearing down the altars he built, restoring the altar of the Lord, offering right sacrifices to the Lord, and commanding the whole nation to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. And the last words that are penned of him, his prayer, and all his sins, in that final section, all of his sins referred to as before he humbled himself. Implicating that when he humbled himself, all of the sins before that we described are wiped clean. Is it not ironic? Do you not see it? I'll take the plate and I'll wipe it off. I'll turn it upside down. Remember, that was the judgment of God? Now all of Manasseh's sins are wiped off. Removed. Totally forgiven. Set free. A child of God, by the grace of God, by the power of this gospel. He's buried in his house in the garden. His epitaph may read, rest in peace. If it be true that Manasseh can be brought to repentance, dear friends, there's hope for everyone. My neighbor and your neighbor. I can go through a list of names, but it won't help. But you have people you know. And God's placed a church here when there wasn't one before. There are people here that need to be reached, not rich, need to be reached. I just want to encourage you as a fellow pastor. The work is difficult, work is long, work is hard. But there is no greater work. There's not something else that's better. These things that are done in the church are eternal. They matter to God. There's nothing greater that can be done than to serve a local church until you die. I've been in church for 49 years. I don't know that I've ever missed. Maybe I did at some point in life somewhere. Sunday morning, Wednesday night, I've been in church for 49 years. I live for Sunday. And I can tell you honestly and clearly, I have no regrets. I've been in good churches. I've been in bad churches. I've been in churches that tried to kill me. I've been in churches that hated me. I've been in all kinds of churches. I've been in churches where the music stunk. I've been in churches where they had no music. I've been in churches where the preaching stunk. I've been in churches where women ran the church. It was a nightmare. I've been in hardwood churches, carpeted churches, lime green carpeted churches. I've been in every type of church you can imagine. And I'm just telling you, there's no other place on the face of the earth than I'd rather be than in a local church worshiping a God who can save people like this. So I encourage you, press on until He comes.